I didn't understand the word allowables.
If there was a time machine for you to go back, what would you have done differently?
For some reason in my brain, every payer, the first 2 years of practice, always paid the same. I didn't understand the word allowables. I didn't understand that a CPT code of a 92507 by United Healthcare was allowable at $50 and should only be seen for 30 minutes, right?
Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata. Strata is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata, talks with Lauren Meffen, who is a speech language pathologist and the owner of Wildflower Therapy and Head Neck Rehab. Paul and Lauren talk through lessons learned from building Lauren's first clinic, balancing personal life and work life, the benefits of being transparent with your staff, why you should be careful not to grow too fast, and how to create a cancellation policy. If you'd like to learn more about Strata and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
So let's start at the top. Let's talk about the practice. What you guys are 5 years into it. What is it? What do you do?
This is my 5th year as a business owner in the practice. And so I started it really on a mission to just change a little bit of healthcare in my community. I was pretty frustrated at a local hospital I worked at, and primarily because the patients weren't receiving the care that I thought they should, mostly due to insurance barriers. And so I thought, well, I can do this better, and boy, was that a crazy thought. And so that led me down the pathway to decide, I think I want to open my own practice one day. And I had been a speech pathologist at that point for about 12 years. And at the time, I was going through a divorce. And so I went to and I had 3 small children. And I thought, okay, I'm really crazy. So I went to local physicians that I had been working with for the 12 years who loved and trusted me. And I said, listen, I'm not ready yet. I want to open my practice, but I need to leave this hospital setting. Can I come work with you and serve these patients in your office? And a group of ear, nose, and throat physicians here in Gainesville at Accent said, absolutely, Lauren, we would love to have you. So I worked with them for around 2 years, maybe a little bit more, until I sort of got settled in my life and decided, okay, I'm going out on my own. And I rented a space on the 2nd floor underneath that group of physicians. And I always had a fantastic relationship with them from day one. We were always very transparent and honest with each other. And they really wanted me successful from the beginning because they felt like I always helped their patients and vice versa. They helped my patients. So it was a great relationship with just a continual referral source. So I started off, I should say, the reason I felt so gutsy to really go out on my own is because I had a relationship with physicians from the moment I started. I had 12 years of acute care settings, and I had great relationships with those doctors, neurologists, general practitioners, surgeons, etc. And so I didn't really just have nothing right off the get-go. And in our community, there's really either the outpatient hospital who would serve these patients, or there was a private practitioner who took no insurance and was self-pay. And I was like, no. We're going to take insurance, and we are going to take every insurance. That's what we're going to do. So I was on a mission to be an insurance-based. I was on a mission to be an insurance-based clinic. And first it started off year 1 with me. And that was the first year my business made the most money in 5 years from a profit standpoint. Not the most revenue that we brought in, but from a profit standpoint, Lauren plus 1 receptionist who helped do everything. We brought in $124,000 that year. I was able to pay myself a decent salary, have a little part-time employee, and I worked pretty decent hours year 1. And I, still had a work-life balance with my kids, etc. Then I was like super excited, like, oh man, this private practice stuff is great. You can really do a great job of making some money. So I started to grow us. So I brought on a clinical fellow, which is just a speech pathologist fresh out of graduate school. I brought on, and continued to grow my insurance contracts. I brought on a speech assistant. Well, here we are, 3 years later, all of a sudden I have like 3 admin staff. We had 2 occupational therapists and several speech pathology providers. So at the height of us, we had 12 employees. And when you looked at our P&L statement, I was like, how in the world are we alive? Like, how? So that was rough. So that was a really rough, like year 3 realization of like, wow, I can't be this big clinic. And then I scaled us back down. I scaled us back down and said, okay, what do we really want to do? In year 4, I just started to slow down and scale us back down to really the employees who loved us, had the schedule they wanted. And I just started asking my staff, like, why do you like working here? You don't make as much money. You can go anywhere else and make, $4 more an hour. What in the world? And slowly, people kind of little by little, it sort of just worked itself out. One thing really huge happened that was like a blessing in disguise. We had a huge audit, and apparently, when you take on insurance contracts, there's this thing that's called re-credentialing that nobody tells you about when you decide, I'm so excited, I'm going to be an insurance clinic, right? So, are you familiar with the re-credentialing process?
Only enough to know that, well, yes. And I chuckle not at the whole situation, but just with your comment that like the thing they don't tell you, and, it's like, add that to the list. There's a million things they don't tell you, but I don't want to interrupt your flow.
So apparently when you become a practice owner, not only are you recommended to hire out your billing, right? That's what everybody tells you to do. Hire out your billing, hire out your credentialing. So you really have no clue what it really takes to run your business. And you're 3 years into it. And now all of a sudden your contracts start to fail. And by fail, I mean, apparently you're supposed to renew them. And imagine that. Every single insurance company of all the exciting ones we were a part of, United Healthcare, and then they went to Optum, and then Optum decided they're not going to be with United Healthcare, Humana. So all these contracts have a different way that you have to re-credential. So now all of a sudden I was like, what do you mean re-credentialing? What do you mean my Medicaid number expired? What do you mean? So all of a sudden there's all these things that had happened that I really had no choice, because we were primarily about a 65 to 75% Medicaid clinic, because I was determined we would be a community-based clinic. Well, when your Medicaid license expires, guess what? You cannot be paid for Medicaid services. So we had about a month of where my clinic nearly shut down, like 30 days, no more income. And Medicaid, they're not really concerned about your desires to have a fast credentialing process. You're just a number in the line, right? And by the way, there's a much larger clinic across the street that can provide services. So yes, Lauren, we'll get to you soon. So each one of those companies, and if you don't know, Medicaid is just the big umbrella, because you have United Healthcare Medicaid and Humana Medicaid and everybody, Sunshine Medicaid, but they contract with somebody else. And so I had to learn all these things. So I decided, okay, damn it. I made it 3.5 years, made it through some really hard stuff these 3.5 years. Medicaid is not going to put me under. So I started to just write a little book of my clinic for myself, like chapter 1, Sunshine Medicaid. Who's my contact? How do I re-credential that person? How do I reach them? What do I do if they don't answer my phone call for 27 days? What do I, so I just made, and I started asking all these questions. And so then I started creating for every payer, Humana, who's the credentialing point of contact, who's my remittance and my payers, what email address do they go to? Because by the way, every time you hire a new office manager, they want their own email address, right? So then I had all these remittances going to one email and then another address. And God forbid you move locations and grow. So then I decided, okay, let me just take it one step at a time. Let me scale back to the people who, number one, in my practice, they've been loyal and they've loved my families and they come into work every day with a positive attitude and they just want to be here to serve the patients. Because I was at a point where I realized I can't serve all these clients and run this practice. So I scaled back to like 1.5 days a week of seeing patients, and the other 900 hours I was doing admin work, which now I'm no longer got this cool 32-hour gig, right? So now I'm working like 70 hours a week and 80 hours a week in my 4th year. And I never see my children. I'm not there to put them to bed. I've missed 2.5 years of soccer practices. I've missed award ceremonies. And year 4, I said, no more. So I drew a whole lot of really great boundaries. I started off by first understanding my business. Like, what in the world did I build? Because I didn't even know. Then second, asking a whole lot of questions to people smarter than me. My CPA, I asked a ton of questions. I was like, what does this mean? What are these numbers? My staff, I asked a lot of questions to them. Like, what would you like your schedule to look like? On Fridays, we have a 50% cancellation rate. What if I close us on Fridays and give you guys a 3-day week? I just started asking a lot of questions and digging deeper. Do you feel like it's fair if we charge a no-show fee? Oh, you don't want me to. Well, what do you want me to do instead? How do we hold these people accountable? And so I started just writing this all down. And I'm a big fan of colored pens. I have this crazy assortment of colored pens, and I love to just draw. So I would just draw out and just put my brain. And then I'd just let it sit. And then I'd come back to it. So now I'm in year 5. And we all of a sudden grew. We have a $500,000 business. I still don't make very much money, but it's manageable. And it's a Monday through Thursday gig. And I have 6 staff who love doing what they do. And they've been with me now over 6 months, which is a huge deal for me. Retention of staff is a huge deal. And that's sort of where we're at. And we're at a place that feels a little bit better. Some of my staff are part-time. They only want to work Wednesday, Thursday. They have family. They take care of their parents. Some of my staff are in school. They want to go back and get a master's degree. And I'm like, well, what do you want to work? And that's where we're at now.
I'm sure you've heard this before, but I got to tell you, your enthusiasm as you discuss those challenges is incredible. I don't mean to laugh. I just think it's so great.
It's hard, and nobody wants to say it's hard. I can't tell you how many times I walk in this door. I was just joking with my staff on Thursday, hey, Connie's going to be out for a month in May. We need new help for May. And by the way, I'm quitting in June. So we're going to need somebody to replace me in June, because you have to realize this is a really hard business. And everybody, when you're a speech pathologist and you're a physical therapist and occupational therapist and you just want to provide great care to patients, like that's your only mission. I loved patient care. That was what I was really good at. And I kept thinking to myself, like, everybody tells you, go open a private practice, go open a private practice. Looking back, if I could get back those 2.5 years or 3 years I feel like I missed of my kid's life, I don't know that I would have opened this. But now, 5 years later, I'm like, okay, Lauren's not available. And I just look at people when they get frustrated with me and I'm honest with my patients, well, Lauren, I need to see you more often. It's like the only people who need me are my kids. Like, I will do my best to provide care for you, but we have a great staff here and they're going to do a better job than me because they're going to be 110% engaged in patient care, where I'm worrying about, did you meet your Medicare deductible? Do I have to tell Connie to remind to pull your eligibility and benefits before you walk out the door because you're going to argue with us about the $67.93? That's where we are.
I think I know what you're going to say, but I am genuinely curious, though, just to see. What do you say to those people out there that talk so much about just cash pay? Like, there's I mean, you can I feel like you can open Instagram or TikTok or even Twitter these days and put in a search term for physical therapy. And there's like a million of these people that are like, I mean, they're clearly selling a course, right? Or something like that. But what do you say to those people? I mean, I think I know what you're going to say, but I'm curious. What do you say to those people that say, well, but Lauren, insurance, come on, it's so much extra work. Just go cash pay and whatever. What do you say to that?
Yeah, so I think in some ways, the cash pay clinics, in some ways, I think they're smarter from the beginning for me, because if they created, and I can respect a business model, right? So if their business model is $120 per hour, regardless of what I'm seeing you for me, that doesn't bring me joy in terms of why I actually show up to this office every day, right? So would it be really exciting if every patient I saw, I was reimbursed $120 an hour? Absolutely. I think I would be super excited, and maybe even I would work a little bit less. But, I think ultimately you have to find the why, right? Like, why do you show up every day? Like, why do you keep this place open? Because I'm often asking myself that. When I'm fighting over $35.72, like, why in the world are we still open? And then the moment I talk with one of our families and say, like, we just need to close, we need a break, we're going to and they're like, no, what do you need? So you realize that for me, the $120 an hour or the private pay clinic was never my motivating factor. I just wanted to provide better care for a very specific type of patient, and it was the head and neck cancer patient who had swallowing disorders. So in our community, I felt like there wasn't a niche for this. Well, then what has happened slowly is I really do believe that when you do things for the right reasons, it might take time, but eventually things work out in life, right? So for me, everything seems to take a little bit longer than I want it to. Like, nothing has happened in a timely manner. And I seem to learn lessons a little bit harder than most people. I don't know if, like, the first time I'm like, no, that was just a mistake, but the second time, maybe it was a coincidence. But the third time I'm like, all right, lessons learned. Let's resolve this, right? So I tend to take longer too to make change because I don't want to accept that my way isn't the right way sometimes. So I think I do have several friends who have cash-based clinics, and for them, that feels great to them. For me, it doesn't feel good. I don't know. But so I say to them, I want you to just, like, if there's anybody who you feel like I can ever be of help, great. If there's anybody I can send to you, great. Because there's patients who want, also, it goes vice versa. Those patients want to pay that $120 and they want that 3 days a week therapy. I want my patient to come 1 day a week, maybe once every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and do what I say. So it's a different mindset. But I also have other little things that keep me busy. I always joke around that I have a pretty significant ADD or ADHD, whatever they call it these days. When I was growing up, they didn't want to call it anything. They just were like, keep Lauren busy, So I tend to put my hand in the pot of a little bit of everything. I do a little bit of teaching, a little bit of course stuff, but it's a totally separate business. So when I started following Tony Maritato, he was starting to delve in that area. And when I started to follow him, I was like, oh, I'm going to split my businesses. And I told him, Tony, I'm going to split mine. He's like, well, let me know how that works out. Well, it's just a pain in the ass. The only difference is now I have to keep track of 2 bank accounts instead of 1. So I should have done it his way, but it is what it is. So,
well, let me, I'm curious. So you, okay. So by the way, for whatever it's worth, from a guy you've never met, I think that, your story, when you talked about like taking a little bit longer to kind of figure things out and stuff like that, I kind of alluded to this in the pre-show, but, I'm not from healthcare. I primarily spent the last 20 years of my life investing in thousands of tech startups and stuff like that. One common trait we see across that portfolio, though, is founders and entrepreneurs tend to be more naive than they realize. And they tend to be the more successful ones in the long term, because it's like they don't even know how successful they could be. So there's like nothing to fear. I think a lot of other people are like, let me write a business plan. And then 7 years later, they're still talking about that business they should have started. So there's a compliment buried in there somewhere. But um, so like you, okay, so I'm going to say this, it's going to come out wrong, but I mean this with all the respect in the world. You have, unless you tell me otherwise, I feel like you've described the street MBA. Like some people pay $100,000 to Wharton to go get an MBA. You've got this like street MBA, the school of hard knocks. You sort of figured it out, and there's a compliment in there somewhere. And as you've now figured this out over the last couple of years, let's say you run into another practice owner. Now you strike me as a very nice person and polite and all that stuff, but I have a feeling that you've come up with like a model in your head. I guess let me just cut to the chase. I'm curious, when you open your books every month, or you look at like, some other entrepreneurs or practice owners' books or something like that, are there like 3 or 4, I mean, pick a number between 1 and 5, but are there like some specific initial numbers that you look at on a regular basis, either for your own practice or for your friends' practices, that give you a general sense of the health of the practice? And there's no wrong answer. I'm just kind of curious how you think about it.
Absolutely. And this was also learned by doing the wrong thing. So one of the things I realized is, wow, my staff is here 9 hours a day, but they're seeing 6 hours of patients. Like, that's a pretty sweet gig. That's a really sweet gig. So all of a sudden, I said to my staff, hey, there's this thing called productivity that we used to have at the hospital. I don't know how to calculate much in life, but I think we're going to take the total number of hours you see patients and the total number of hours I pay you to be here, and we're going to do some math. And I need you guys somewhere around 85 to 90% productive in that day with a patient in your room. And then I also said to my staff, how do you want to be paid? Do you want PTO? Do you want vacation? What's important to you? Do you want just an hourly rate? Everybody in my business is a W-2 employee. So that was a decision I made really from one of my, as you would say, sort of my street cred MBA. I sort of have hired different coaches along the way, right? So first I hired a speech pathologist who ran this crazy, successful, healthy millionaire business, right? And I was like, okay, that's what I want in life. I want to be a millionaire and I want to run a great business. And certainly he knows how to do it. So I'll pay him $1,000 to teach me. So one of the first rules in his business was that everybody's a W-2 employee. So from the get-go, I stuck to that. And later in life, I sort of wish I had learned the 1099 side of things. But now that I have the W-2 figured out, I can't go back on that. So I'm sticking to that. So the number of hours I pay my staff versus the number of hours they see patients. I also look at cancellation rate. That's a huge deal. It's a huge deal. Same day cancellation policies. What do? We're pretty stinking flexible with our families. And I also looked at if you can't, what is fair to not piss off our families and keep them coming to us, over a $45 charge versus, hey, by the way, my kids have been sick for 3 weeks also. Do you want to take a couple weeks break, or do you want to just call us back? You have 7 days to reschedule this visit, or do you want to be a Zoom? So I also taught my staff, if you get a same day cancel, you have a couple of choices. You can cancel that appointment and give the family clear expectations. You have 7 days to reschedule this appointment prior to us sort of hounding you about what are we going to do. We say we're going to charge. I can think of about 3% of the time I've charged. And most of those 3% charges were purely principle. Like, they were not kind humans. And I was just like, fine, $45 charge, right? So, and they probably weren't kind to not me, but one of my staff, because then what happens is you grow this staff who's like your family. Right? So I have these beautiful humans who every day dedicate their life to my mission and my practice. And then you're going to come in and not be kind to them. Well, I'm like, well, the only way I can punish you in a sense is that $45 charge. But now we just kindly take them off the schedule. So I've also become that. So same day cancellations, the number of hours your staff works, and then also sort of explaining, I'm a huge fan of transparency with my staff. If my staff wants to know, what am I paid for this session? I tell them, what does the business make for this session? So if they say to me, I see a client for 60 minutes, I need to follow the rules. At 53 minutes, I'm winding down that session. I say, you were just reimbursed $71.44 for that session. But by the way, we also paid our biller to do that prior authorization. We paid our administrative staff to complete those scheduling appointments, and we paid for us to have an office. And now you're telling me you need $100 worth of forms for your assessment as well. So just a reminder, and so my staff really, I think educating would be the third thing when it comes to how do I motivate my staff to keep their schedules full. If they are dedicated and motivated to this business and understanding this business, because I say to them, I can't give you all of the beautiful things the corporate world can give you, but I can give you time. I can give you time. How much time do you want off in the summer? How much time do you want to spend with your family? And if they want 3 weeks off, 4 weeks off, I 100% honor that. So I think the third thing that I would say from a standpoint is I let my staff know which insurance payers are able to be what we call extended. So let's say we have a cancellation. So we schedule in our clinic, we are pediatrics and adult. Let's pretend for 2 seconds we're going to look at our pediatric schedule. We have 2 pediatric patients and I've scheduled them 30-minute visits back to back in 1 hour. My second patient cancels for the hour. My first patient is a United Healthcare Medicaid payer. Now that patient can be extended up to 60 minutes in that day, only they were strategically scheduled for 30 minutes because no-shows and cancellations are a thing in our business. When you look at the numbers, it's around a 33%, depending where you pull it from, for that same day cancel rate. So I know those numbers. So now I've not only learned, hey, we're just going to get same day cancels, but how do I cut those same day cancels from 33% to I've got us down to about a 16% to where we are filling those schedules with the quote unquote extensions. And that's where we're flexible with our families. So we might say, hey, Paul, I noticed last week you had to same day cancel on us. By the way, I have a cancellation after your session today. Can you stay an extra 30 minutes and we'll just avoid that cancel charge? And guess what you say? Sure, I'm already here. Why not? So I would say we've learned also kind of those 3 things of like, okay, how many hours am I paying you for versus what does your schedule need to look like? Number 2, we're just going to have same day cancellations and no-show fees. It is what it is, or no shows. We don't charge, but we say we will. And number 3, what's the percentage of healthy commercial self-pay and Medicaid that I can run this clinic on, still pay my staff somewhat of a reasonable salary and give them the time off and understand that if we shut down for, in Florida, it's hurricane season, we get a hurricane day, right? So if we do that and we're still okay, we're not going to drown that month. So those are the 3 things we look at in our business. And those are the 3 things I would say you need to understand before you try to hire a staff, because there's nothing worse than bringing on a $70,000 occupational therapist or speech pathologist and their schedule's 50% full and they don't understand how to fill their schedule. So that's a struggle.
Again, there's a compliment here somewhere. Man, your story is incredible, and the way that you share it is just so engaging. I think it's just incredible. I think that a lot of people are going to get a lot of value out of this, and
I hope. I've had a lot of tears over these exciting things that have come later.
Right.
Yeah.
On a personal note, were you like? Did you when you were like? And this might be too much, but like.
No.
What did you study in school other than did you study anything else? Like what was your background?
Well, so I was always ADD. So I did communication science and disorders as an undergraduate. And what happened is in high school, took 4 years of Spanish and I was Spanish club president, et cetera, et cetera. And then when I went into college, I decided I wanted to do Italian. So at a certain point, and at that point in life, I wanted 0 children and never to be married. Like that was my plan. So I was like, okay, I started off, I said, all right, Dad, my dad was a police officer, you're going to go to school. We've paid your Florida prepaid 2 + 2. You will go to the community college and then you will go get a undergraduate degree and likely you will continue on. And it was very important to me to always meet those sort of expectations. I do believe in setting expectations. Now as a mother of that I am, I'm like, come on, dude, like the expectation is you come home and you clean the dishes. Like my expectations are a little lower than my dad's, but they're still there. So as an undergraduate, I thought, okay, of course I'm going to be a doctor. I mean, that's what every, excited freshman wants to be in life. I am pre-med. Well, I took my first year of chemistry and I was like, I am not doing this. No way. So I transitioned over to what's nursing. And I did not get into nursing school. And my dad said, well, damn it, Lauren, you're going to get out of the community college because your 2 years is up. So you better pick a degree. So I was like, my dad could never hear. I was always, interested in audiology. I was like, all right, let me try audiology. So audiology and speech pathology as an undergraduate are the same degree. And then I met this teacher who I then became what I call a lab rat. Back when I was in college around 20 something years ago, we were paid like $5 an hour to do work for them, right? So I met this speech pathologist and she was pretty inspirational in my excitement for the field. And she would talk about the brain and the things that would happen from a neuroscience standpoint. And I was always very fascinated by muscles and science. So I would follow her and be like, can I carry your coffee? Can I grade your papers? Is there anything I can do? Well, then slowly she was like, I'll let you volunteer for like an hour, and basically prove yourself to me. Well, I did. I proved myself. I worked very hard and I worked with her for 4 years and then received my master's in speech pathology. And from there, I sort of just did a little bit of everything right out of school. At the time, I had met my ex-husband. And then soon after I received my master's degree, I did all those beautiful checkbox things, graduate degree, check, marriage, check, pregnant with first child, check, 401k, check, bought a house, check, and then like 10 years later, you're like, what just happened? I have 3 children and like a pain in the ass husband. Like, where am I at in life? And so, I can say that with love because I have a fantastic relationship with my, ex-husband. We raise our children together 1 mile apart. I bought a home just a mile away from him. And so we raised 3 beautiful children together and we do much better as friends now than, we did the last couple of years of our marriage. Those were rough, but everybody goes through those things. I think just nobody wants to talk about them,
So, you so just as an aside, when I think about common patterns I see across, entrepreneurs and stuff like that, particularly successful ones, is that I would boil it down to 2 traits that they subjectively display, but I don't know how to objectively measure. And so those 2 traits that I see across our entire portfolio of investments is that they are relentlessly resourceful and incredibly self-aware. They just sort of figure it out, and all that. So it's super, super interesting. And the other thing that I'll just say also, now just bringing it over to like this PTOT speech world, is that one of the other common traits that you've sort of shared here, that we've seen with other practice owners and stuff like that is this, or one of them anyways, is this desire to like kind of share the numbers with the staff. A lot of times people are like, you're the employee, this is what you're going to get paid. And if you don't like it, pound sand. And what we actually hear in conversations like this, particularly with the successful ones, is that, hey, look, revenue and costs combine to get to profit, and it's not as big as you think. That that extra pile of papers you shoved in the trash because you didn't want to like mess with it, well, that cost X dollars, and da da da. So it's just that transparency, I think, is a common trait.
The transparency is huge.
Yeah. You also, when you were telling your story, I know that we haven't had a whole lot of time to get to know each other, but I always find it interesting that there are certain things that entrepreneurs share that, like what you thought was a big deal is obviously a big deal to you, but then you'll sort of like quickly talk over something that I think is a huge deal, but you're like, it's like not a big deal. Earlier in this conversation, you said, well, you decided that you wanted to focus on or niche down into, I forget exactly how you said it, but it was like neck, head and neck cancer. Yeah. So you kind of just talked about that. Like, it was like a done deal, but, can you just share like what made you like, at what point when you were running your practice did you realize that niching it was important? Or was that accidental? Like, how did you?
So it was 100% accidental. So what happened is when I was in the hospitals and I worked in acute care, those were the patients who, when they would leave the hospital, I would like go home and worry about. And I would just like think about like, well, who's going to help them? Like, how in the world will they receive somebody who's honest and cares for them? And so then I started just really spinning, and about my 12th year of being a speech pathologist, you know, my supervisor used to tell me, Lauren, it takes 5 years to be a great speech pathologist, at least just an okay one, just an okay. It's like, you're crazy. Like, I'll have this in the bag in like 3 years, right? So I considered myself always an overachiever in life. So I was like, you know, well, 5 years into it, I was like, oh my gosh, she was right. Like, definitely now I feel like I can walk in the room and sort of work with any patient. So around my 12th year, I was just totally bored. I was really good at the things in the hospital. And I just thought, I really want to be able to learn and be really good at one specific thing that's really, in our field, a little bit more complex. Well, so it just so happens, remember I told you that it happens that good things come later on. Well, it just so happens that in the head and neck cancer world, there's this thing called endoscopies, which are swallowing studies in which a speech pathologist will stick a camera in the nose and watch the way a patient swallows. Well, years later in my field, one of the year number 1.5, I told myself I was going to buy a fees unit. And I consider myself a cheap ass. I hate spending money. I love to thrift shop. I don't like spending money. It's a statement. So, here we are about 1.5 years into my practice, and I say, okay, I'm going to buy a fees unit because I need to look at what's going on with these patients swallow. So I purchased a fees unit off of eBay for $7,000. They are typically around $30,000. And I met the speech pathologist about 4 hours away, and she gave me in the parking lot at Dunkin' Donuts a rundown of how this equipment works. And I came back and just learned how to do it. I stuck a camera in my nose a bunch of times. Then I went to a course and I decided, all right, I'm a fees specialist, right? So let's go through. And I say that specialist with a joke because I never really consider myself a specialist in anything. There's a couple of things I would say like, well, I'm really good at those things, but I don't really think of the word specialist, right? So I have this fees unit. Well, guess what happens? About 1 year later, I get a Medicare audit. Why? Because the fees is the highest level of reimbursement in a clinic. And we're cranking out 20 fees a week at $196 per patient in 45 minutes. So Medicare comes and says, do you really have a unit? Nobody else in this area does. And I'm like, oh, really? They don't? Yeah. Do you want to take? So I took the auditor back. I showed him, you have to open up. They take pictures of the unit, and then I'm like, so what do you mean by nobody else has a unit? So then I got smarter. I was like, okay, patient. Hey, Paul, I just finished doing your swallow study. Did you want to take a 60-second video of that so you could show your doctor when you go back and see him exactly what's going on? So when it came to marketing, I never, ever spent a single dollar in marketing. I've sort of made some flyers and stuffed them in places, but I've never done any ads or anything. So all of a sudden I decided, okay, not only am I not going to market via spending money because I still hate spending money, now I have this fees endoscopy. Then I have this little head and neck cancer niche that fell into my lap. I was part of the tumor board. I always kept a great relationship with my physicians. We had no outpatient speech pathologist at the hospital that I left. When I left on very good terms. I did not burn a single bridge there. I was frustrated with them, but they all knew I was frustrated. I had meetings with the CEO, the CFO, the blah, everybody I had already voiced, Lauren needs backup. or she's leaving, and I was at that point in my life just like, I'm giving up on everything, people. So don't take me, so here we were. I had a great relationship over the years I was there. And the oncology population was one I always kept very close to me. So then I kept gaining these weird clinical certifications. And before you know it, I had all these little weird clinical certifications, and I was a head and neck cancer specialist. And then I teach lymphedema and head and neck cancer at the lymphedema conference. And so I started just that was a little piece of me that I really love to do. And now I only see head and neck cancer patients. So if we receive a referral for head and neck cancer, I see them, my staff sees everybody else. So they see a voice disorder, they see a stroke. If they want my help, I just will pop in and greet my patients, the referrals, and I'll give them a second opinion. I'm happy to do that, but I'm not their primary therapist. And I make that very clear to the patient walking in the door. And that's how I've learned to manipulate walking in this place. I'm like, where else am I going to go that I now am off at 2:00? I pick up my children because I missed those years of their life. I'm not missing anymore. I'm off at 2:00. I tell my staff, if the place is burning down, just call the fire department, send me a text, and get everybody out of the building. So it's like, we all know what to do in the events of that, and it's no. Yeah, so it's just tricky. You learn those little balances. So then I realized that I needed to develop a niche. And so now what has happened is the larger hospitals refer to me for those weird diagnoses. Their physical therapists, I've befriended them. I love them. The physical therapist at the Rehab hospital here at the University of Florida, they send their patients to me. I don't see them for forever. I see them for a few visits. I help them and then send them back to UF. So I also respect that.
Earlier you mentioned, so you're 5 years into the practice, and you sort of alluded to this idea that the first two were just kind of you didn't say this, but you sort of alluded to it just being tough. It's just really tough. If there was a time machine for you to go back, what would you have done differently? Or is there anything you would have done differently?
So for some reason in my brain, every payer, the first 2 years of practice, always paid the same. I didn't understand the word allowables. I didn't understand that a CPT code of a 92507 by United Healthcare was allowable of $50 and should only be seen for 30 minutes, right? And I didn't understand that a CPT code, the same exact one, billed by Medicare and a secondary Blue Cross Federal, was going to pay me $83 with no patient responsibility. And I didn't understand that Humana was going to pay $62, with no patient responsibility or a $10 copay. So the word allowables, I think that before you open your own practice, if I were to go back, I would still be an insurance clinic, but I would take on one insurance at a time, and I would master that insurance and then move to the next insurance. I didn't understand that a UHC was, by the way, there's a UHC AARP LPPO, that one requires an HMO referral from the physician. And if you don't receive that insurance card, you're not paid for any of those visits. And then the other thing that I would have taken back is understanding evaluations. When you go to want to scale your practice, the first thing you do is you start accepting a whole bunch of referrals. Well, what happens is those referrals, if you accept them here in Florida at the Medicaid rate, are reimbursed at $51.41, period. They don't have a time limit. They are untimed. So I have now taught my staff going back, you are seeing this payer who's going to reimburse you at $51.41, whether you spend 38 minutes with that patient or you spend 59 minutes with that patient. If you're going to ask me for administrative write-up time later in life, I just want to remind you, we were reimbursed $51.41. Your hourly rate is $40 an hour. We can't lose a ton of money. We need to be able to make that up somehow. So I've now taught my staff, and I wish I had taught them sooner, when they see an evaluation, perhaps if they see a commercial evaluation, that commercial evaluation is going to be somewhere around $72 reimbursement for OT and $99 to $113 for speech on the pediatric side. So now with the reimbursement, I've taught my staff which payers they can spend really, like, how do you want that to look? So then I've also taught my staff when we go to scale, this particular payer needs a mandated assessment in terms of objective measures. You have to use a standardized assessment. By the way, this particular payer doesn't care if you utilize 73 subtests or 2 subtests. So I've now studied the payers, and I now understand for my staff to be more efficient, they now have learned, Lauren, can I give, 2 subtests today and 2 subtests next week, and the rest of my session is therapy and treatment and not have a miserable 1 hour? Absolutely, because that's not required. So I've learned what the payers require, and the ones that require too much of my staff, when the staff says to me, I can't write up an eval in that hour, and then we've started to cut them out. We've declined those referrals. We are so sorry. We are full on this payer. I use those words. We are full on this payer because I don't want to burn bridges. I'm not interested in not accepting that payer anymore. I'm just saying at the moment we're full, and we call those families and we say, hey, Paul, we received a referral on your child. We are so grateful for that, but unfortunately we are currently full on your insurance plan. Would you like us to add you to the wait list, or would you like to continue to look for other clinics? And most of the time, that 7-minute phone call connecting with that parent, they want to be added to a wait list. And so then I share with them that wait list might look like 2 months or 6 months. And I'm going to encourage you, if it's 6 months, to look for other clinics. And so those were the other things I learned.
See, those are the, it's so interesting. Let me zoom out for a second. I think society has sort of glamorized entrepreneurship, and everything is supposed to look like Shark Tank and private jets and whatever Instagram shows you these days. But the truth of it is that it's what you're describing there. It's that specific wording that you just used. We're full on this payer. That didn't come accidentally. Like, you didn't, I imagine you weren't just sitting there having dinner one night thinking, gosh, that's the phrase I'm going to use. There were probably like 87,000 little conversations. You're like, ooh, why'd they get annoyed when I said that? Why did I say that? And then you finally like intuitively landed on this other language. And it's that iteration, it's that, this is, I'm not trying to be anybody's Tony Robbins or anything like that, but one of the things I think a lot about is the fact that, like, my parents, your parents, everybody's parents probably worked 1 or 2 jobs in the arc of their career. And as time has gone on and industry and technology has changed, you and I are going to work a couple different roles through the arc of our career, but our children may do a couple different things at the same time. Like, the nature of work is changing. But where I'm going with this is that success, like in your case, I think you define success, as the right balance between flexibility and money, and other people would say, I only want money. Other people would say, the point is success is not, just one thing, but success, however you define it, is really a function of the number of things you try. And in your case, you've tried a million little things, not little like small, but you've done a lot of micro experiments through your journey, and you've landed on these nuggets, and then it just compounds from there, which is just really fascinating. I want to be respectful of your time. In terms of your, like, you have alluded to like this clear boundary between practice and life, and sort of your, what you value, which, I think is super respectable. I love that. If somebody listening to this wanted to learn more about the way you think about it, obviously they got to be respectful of the boundaries, but should they email you? Should they find you on LinkedIn?
Email is great. I have a 2024 goal to improve my social media life. I'm not overly excited with, social media, but email is lovely. My email, you guys can you include it in the chat, the Lauren@GainesvilleTeam.com. That's great. And I think the other nugget is, like, you learn these things through failing. Right? So, like, I consider, and I told you I'm a perfectionist in some ways and an overachiever in other ways. When you fail at certain things in life that you didn't mean to fail at, you develop much healthier boundaries so that you don't make that mistake failing again in your personal life. My professional life has always been easy. I've always been great in my career. I've always loved it. I've always been energetic. I've always been excited about being a speech pathologist, but personal life has always been like, well, how do I keep that together? What am I supposed, how am I supposed to help my child with that? So I think that you have to always know that like there's other parents and there's other, entrepreneurs who are struggling in things, and you don't just get there, through it. And now I have, you find things along the way by mistake. I found my second husband, who I was corrected the other day is my last husband by somebody. I found him by mistake, and he wants absolutely nothing to do with my business. We joke around, he's been fired 12 times, but the truth is every time a sink breaks, he's up here fixing it. Every time a light bulb is like weirdly, he's the one who the girls call. It's now at the point that I have given them his cell phone number because I'm like, he's going to respond to you, not me. So,
yeah,
so I think other piece is entrepreneurship is there has to be a balance, and you have to have a posse. You can't be solo, and people believe in you. And if you find that balance, with your therapist, I've taught them like, hey, by the way, if you balance a commercial payer and a Medicaid payer, your hourly rate that you bring in the clinic is higher. Guess what that means for your hourly take-home rate? At your review, we're going to be able to bump you up. So I've taught my staff all those little tricks, and you just learn them.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.